is also impermanent. And if you understand this chain of dependent origination, then you will immediately attain liberation. Then Buddha continued, he may not regard body as self, but he regards self as possessing body. Again, that regarding is a volition, and all the rest above is repeated. When one knows and sees thus, monks, the immediate destruction of the asavas occurs. Or he may not regard body as self, or self as possessing body, but he regards body as in self, or he regards self as in body. And similarly, that craving and all that leads to, if he understands the chain of dependent origination, then he attains destruction of the asavas. Or he may not regard body as self, or self as in consciousness, etc. But he holds such a view. That which is the self in the world, having passed away, that I shall be permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change. That eternalist view is a volition. And similarly, volition comes from all the conditions. It comes from craving, and craving comes from feeling, etc. If he understands all that chain, then he can also become immediately enlightened. Or he may regard body as self, or etc., or hold such an eternalist view. But he holds the annihilationist view, which is, were I not then, it would not now be mine. I shall not be, to me it shall not be. That means after death, then there's nothing anymore. Then even then, if he understands that is a volition, and then that chain of volitions that leads to suffering, if you understand the whole chain, then he becomes enlightened. But he does not regard all that above, but he is perplexed, doubtful, indecisive in regard to the true Dhamma. That perplexity, doubtfulness, indecisiveness in regard to the true Dhamma is a volition. That volition, what is its source, its origin? When the unlearned ordinary person is contacted by a feeling born of ignorance contact, craving arises. Hence that volition is born. So that volition, monks, is impermanent condition, dependently arisen. That craving is impermanent, that feelings is impermanent, contact is impermanent, ignorance is impermanent, etc. When one knows and sees thus, monks, the immediate destruction of the asavas occurs. That's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha has given this quite a long Dhamma talk to these monks who came to see him. Basically, this is a bit similar, the pattern, like the other side, but here it incorporates the teachings on the 5 aggregates plus the teachings on dependent origination, paticca samuppada. So I stop here for tonight. Anything to discuss? Now you notice these suttas are all quite heavy going. Not like the first book. Yeah.
It seems to be a very simple sutta.
Compared to some of the longer ones, yeah.
And just but they say that the 5 ascetic monks have been into a state of jhana. Are they, when they are listening to the Dhamma talk, are they in jhana?
No. They cannot be in jhana when they are listening to the Dhamma talk. But in the suttas it is mentioned, if a monk attains the jhanas, the 5 hindrances are permanently eliminated. Are eliminated, although the roots have not been pulled out, but they are eliminated, so that anytime the mind is very clear.
Pandey mentioned that in order to see things clearly, actually, we need to have spiritually mature. How to cultivate spiritual maturity in our spirit? And that's my question is that those ascetic practices that are used by the forest monk fasten the process or
this maturing on the spiritual path is a natural process for everybody, and when you are more mature, then you make greater effort. When you are not mature, even though the Buddha is around, you still not be interested to go and listen to him. So this process of maturing on the spiritual path is a very, very natural process. So if you make the effort, it's only because it's natural that you do it. For example, like our Siddhartha Gotama, because he had already probably attained Sakadagami in his previous life, then even he had such a good family, such a wealthy and happy life, still he gave up and went forth, renounced everything to be a homeless beggar and suffer so much. So if your time is not up, you can't force yourself to do it. There's no such thing as forcing yourself.
The aesthetic practices are followed by the forest monk. What they are doing is trying to get the revulsions towards the aggregate, and then that they become dispassionate and all this, so that they get enlightenment.
You see, the Dhamma is leading us in that way to understand the nature of the five aggregates, or the nature of dependent origination of suffering and all that. And if we understand that, then we practice according to the advice of the Buddha to become enlightened. So there are some people who prefer to go to the forest. On the other hand, there are some people who can practice even without becoming a monk. Like during the Buddha's time, there were a few laymen. They still remain as laymen, but they practiced until they became anagamins. That means they had attained at least the 4 jhanas. But when you look into the description of about them, even though they stay in the house, they behave like a monk, in the sense that they don't associate with people. They've given up their business. They let their wives look after their business, and then they have let go of everything. Even one of them even called the 4 wives and told the wives that I intended to practice the spiritual path. If any of you wants to get married to another man, just let me know, I will give you away. And the first wife said, oh yeah, I want to get married to such and such a man. So he immediately called for that man and give the wife away. So he, even though he does not go and stay in a cave, but to him his room is like a cave. He stays in that room and practice without going out. Practice day and night until he attains the jhanas and becomes an anagamin. So whether a person becomes a monk or a layman is up to that person. And also, even after becoming a monk, not all monks will become forest dwellers. Not all monks will beg for their food. So it depends on the person. All people are all different.
Is it true that lay people cannot become an arahant, or I heard it from somebody that if they reach the level, become an arahant, they must don the robe or else they will die the next day.
Firstly, there are cases of lay people like Yasa in the Vinaya books. Yasa is one man who comes from a very rich family, and the Buddha made him come out of the house in the night and go to the forest where the Buddha was. And the Buddha spoke the Dhamma to him and he attained stream entry. The next morning the father went looking for him and then came to where the Buddha was, and the Buddha taught the same Dhamma to the father. The father also attained stream entry. But Yasa, hearing the same Dhamma the second time, attained arahanthood as a layman. But after attaining arahanthood, he does not go back to the house. That old Yasa has died. There is no more of the Yasa in him. He has died. You can hear Dhamma cannot fold up your legs like that. So a lay person can become an arahant, but after becoming an arahant, he is totally a different person already. He cannot go back to the home. And it is pure speculation that if he does not renounce, he will die within one day. There is no such thing mentioned in the Sutta or the Vinaya. It's just that he will not go back home. And it's impossible for a person once they become enlightened. That old lay person has died. He's no more that lay person, so he cannot go back to the home. He will either become a monk or an ascetic. He will go to the forest and then. I don't know whether that was a true story, but I don't know whether because of that people say that if a lay person does not, after becoming an arahant, does not ordain, he will die. But in this case, he did not die because he did not ordain. He died because he got gored by a cow. But in the case of this man, Bahya Daruchirya, I think he was not an arahant. I think he may have attained anagamin or something. Not sure. This in the monk's discipline, the Buddha at first said that the monk should eat one meal a day. Actually, initially he did not specify how many meals, and then the monks could eat as many times as they wanted. And